Let's say we want to apply a confirmatory factor analysis to our self-compassion scale. Well, in this case, we will want to use all of the items. So I have listed them here in the Use Variables section. Now, the way in which I produced it here, it says everything from SK1 to IS4, so it will take all the variables in the dataset from this one to this one. Then I have mentioned this statement here, categorical are all. Which estimator do you think MPlus will use by default? That's right, it will use the weighted least squares with robust means and variances estimator. So if I don't put any estimator here in the analysis section, that is the one it will use. Now let's see how we would specify this model. So the kind of statement you would need is factor by, and then you just list the items. So this means the factor is expressed by, and then scores on those items. Now the factor is a latent variable, so with this statement we are creating it, but we also have to give it a label. So when you write this statement, you first have to decide what your factor represents based on the meaning of these items and give it an appropriate label. Now, why don't you go ahead and try for yourself to write the by statements that would correspond with our three factors here: self-kindness, common humanity, and isolation. So have a go. Right, let's do it together. So I would label my first one just kind, self-kindness, by SK1, SK2, SK3, SK4. Then the next one, I think I'll just call it by, and then it would be CH1, CH2, CH3, CH4. And finally, isolation by IS1, IS2, IS3, IS4. A small but important point about factor analysis is that you need to have at least 3 items per factor. So this is important. It is in fact possible to do factors with a lower number of items if you're quite advanced and you know what you're doing, but that usually implies placing some constraints in some ways in order to have the model be identified, and most often you will not be justified to include such constraints. So it's better to follow the rule of thumb of having at least 3 items per factor. Now, we could also include correlations between factors, but in fact MPlus will do so by default. How would those correlations look like if you wanted to put them in? Why don't you have a go and add those correlations in? Right, so let's see how that goes. You would have kind with hum, and hum with iso, and kind with iso. These are our 3 correlations. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to not put them in explicitly, because I want you to see how MPlus does them for us. But I'm not going to take them out completely. I've just put an exclamation mark here, so that MPlus doesn't see these commands. Now, for the output section, I have selected these 2 things. What do you think this means? So we probably haven't used this yet at this point, but this asks MPlus to list a section in the output where it suggests potential additional paths in our model that could make our model fit be better. This is very useful for factor analysis, as sometimes we have correlated residuals between items. It doesn't mean you will always have that, but sometimes you do. Right, now what do you think this other thing means? And why did we choose this specific version? Okay, so let's see. We wanted to get standardized results, and we have listed that all of our variables are categorical. This statement where you say categorical R should refer only to dependent variables in your model. But in a factor analysis, all questionnaire items are dependent variables, because your items to that questionnaire are seen as a function of how you feel inside, which is your score on the factor. So these are all dependent variables. Now, STD is usually chosen when you have dependent variables that are categorical, so you want the standardization to be done only using the variance of any existing factors. And as the factors are seen as continuous variables themselves, we can use this option. So let's press run and see what the output looks like.